Okay, so let's jump in and start making our part. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new project. So we're going to open the data panel, and within your team, we're going to create a new project called Hexapod. Press enter to confirm. We're going to open our Hexapod project. You'll see there's nothing here. But now that we have it open, we are going to create a new design if one isn't already open. In my case it is, but if it's not for you, press new design. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to press save. And we're going to call this the Hexapod assembly. This is going to be our main assembly file. You can see you can change the location that you want it to be in. In this case, I want it to be in my Hexapod project, which you'll see on the left here. Click save, and you'll see your Hexapod assembly appears. Now that we've done this, we can close the data panel and really start designing. As I said earlier, in Fusion you want to try and break things down into components. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new component for the base plate, and that's the first part we're going to make. So we're going to create new component, and from here we can rename our component, and we're going to call it baseplate. Click OK, and you'll see that the baseplate component appears in your browser on the left hand side, and you'll see that it's within your Hexapod assembly. You'll also see, I talked about activation in the last video, that this little black dot is in our activation circle, and this one is now blank, which means that anything we do from this point on until we activate something else is going to be within our baseplate. Now right now all we have is an origin, which is turned off, but as we start creating sketches and bodies, these will appear in our baseplate. So the very first thing we're going to do is, as I said in the last video, we start left and move our way right. So we're starting on our sketch on the very left hand side. We're going to create a sketch and create a 2D image of what we want to make. After that, we'll drag it into the 3D. So create a sketch. And the first thing it asks you with a sketch is what plane you want to put your sketch on. Now because a sketch is 2D, you can't have it on all three planes at once. And in our case, we want it in the XY plane, or the flat plane, so that it's horizontal. So you can click on this plane, and you see that the grid appears and is now permanent in that plane. I'm going to go to the view cube, click on the top. This way I'm looking straight down at my sketch, and you can see it really clearly. Now that we've created a sketch, you'll see that the sketch menu has come up. A new area has appeared within our design at the top, and you see all of these sketching tools that have appeared. Much like all of our other parts, we have left to right. So it's create on the left hand side, where we can create 2D shapes such as rectangles, circles, slots, even text. After that, we can modify our sketch with the various tools there, and then we can constrain it, inspect it, and so on. Now we want to create a hexagon. In Fusion 360, this comes under the polygon section. We're going to use the first polygon, and this allows us to do any sort of polygon and define the number of sides that it has. You'll see that now I've selected polygon. Just below my cursor on the right hand side is a little polygon shape, and a little crosshairs has appeared on my mouse. I can now click, and this will be the center of our polygon that we can drag out. Because we want our center to be in the center of the main file, that's where the origin currently is, I'm going to click in this center point, and you'll see that when I lock on to the center point, a square appears. It's a little bit unclear here, but in other places you'll see it, a square appears, and that shows that you've locked onto a point. I'm going to click, and then I can move my mouse out to the side and rotate it, and you can see that we're drawing this polygon. Now whenever you're drawing something, it'll typically give you the options that you need, the main ones. In this case, we have the distance that we want from the center, and also we have the letter or the number 6 in another box. Now the distance refers to the edge point to the middle, and the 6 refers to the number of edges that we have. In this case, I'm going to leave the dimension for now. I'm going to redimension it in a second after we've created our shape. But I do want to make sure, I do want to show you how many sides you can have. And one of the key tools that you can use is when you're drawing something, you can press the tab key to switch between the different boxes. So you see here, I can press tab and switch back. Now I'm going to make, we want 6, but for example, I could make it 12 and you'd see a 12-sided shape, or 5, for example, and you'd see 125, 5, and you'd see a 5-sided shape. We want it to be 6, and you'll also see that once you've put in a number manually and then press tab, you see you can go back and change it. In this case, as I said, we want 6 sides, but I'm not going to write in the dimension right now. I'm going to dimension it straight after this, so that I can show you the dimension too. So just click anywhere, and you'll see we have this outline. Because we've created it as a specific shape, it's an enclosed area, and you can slightly see, maybe you can't tell, but you should be able to see a slight blue tinge to the inside area here. So it's slightly shaded with the blue on the inside, it's clear on the outside. That shows that you have an enclosed area. Now that I've done this, you'll see I'm still on, my mouse is still on the polygon tool. I don't want that anymore, so I'm going to press escape, and it will return to my normal selection cursor. So I have this shape, but as I said, we want to dimension this, and I wanted to use the dimension tool so I could show you how it works. So if you want to set a certain size for a part, you can go to Create and Sketch Dimension. You can also press D on your keyboard and it'll automatically select that. You'll see the little dimension icon comes up, and I can select 2 lines and it'll draw a dimension between them. Now we want the distance between each line, the overall width, to be 160 millimeters. Now mine's automatically in millimeters, so you don't need to type in the unit, but you can type in units if you want to. Once you've typed it in, press enter, and you'll see that your hexagon will size up or down depending on where you clicked, and you'll see this dimension that is now on. A really important feature of Fusion that I want to tell you about now is constraints. With a sketch, ultimately every sketch that you make, you want to be fully constrained. Now what this means is that it cannot move in any way because you have fixed it in all the different orientations and movements that it could have. In this case, if I click escape and go back to my normal cursor, I've now fixed the distance between these 2 edges, and because this has a constraint of being a certain shape, all of those edges are now that fixed distance apart. But you'll see if I click on it and move it, you'll see that I can actually rotate my polygon. This means that it is not fully constrained because I can move it. So what we want to do is we want to add another constraint to fix it in place. One of the easy ways you can tell as to whether a sketch is fully constrained or not is the colour of the outline. So currently you can see that it is blue. As soon as it is fully constrained, you'll see that it turns to a solid black line. If you're struggling to figure out how something is constrained, the easiest way to see how you need to constrain it is just to click on a line and try and drag it and see how it moves. In this case, it's rotating, so I can see that the center point is fixed and the actual shape is fixed. They're all constrained by it. It's actually the rotation and all where one of these lines, I need to constrain one of these lines to be fixed in place, and then the whole thing won't be able to rotate either. Don't forget, if you move something, you can always undo it. So best bet is to drag it, try and move it, see what moves, and then base your constraint off that. In this case, as I said, we want to stop these rotating, and one of the first constraints that we have is the horizontal vertical constraint. What this does is it takes a line and it fixes it at being either horizontal or vertical. If you click on your constraint, you'll see it gets highlighted, and then you can select the line that you want. In this case, I'm going to select this one, and you'll see that it rotates so that it is vertical. As I said, our line has now become black, which means that if I press escape and try and drag my shape, it's not going to move anywhere because it is fully constrained. You might have also noticed this little icon on the side. Every constraint has a little icon that you can see. In this case, that's the horizontal vertical constraint. The best way to tell what constraints they are is by looking at the little icons up here. We also have in the middle here this constraint, which is constraining the shape that we have. And if I just hover over the center there, you can see there's actually another constraint here, which is another constraint. You can see it's a coincident constraint. What you can do with the constraints is you can actually click on them and you can delete them. So if I click on it, you see it's highlighted blue, I can press delete, and that constraint has now disappeared. you can see my shape now goes back to blue. And if I click on it, I can actually drag it, and you can see where that constraint was working. It was stopping it from moving linearly. I can just press Ctrl Z, undo, constraint is back. Now the reason you might want to delete a constraint is because, as you can see here, Fusion 360 automatically assigns constraints as you sketch. So in that instance, because I started my polygon from the very center of the part and that we had that locked on square, it assigned a constraint because when I would click there, it assumed that I wanted it to be fixed there. So there are times when you might create a constraint accidentally while sketching, and in that case you can go in, click on it, and press delete. Hopefully though, it should be more helpful than it is. We have our main hexagon now, and what we want to do is to create our base plate. We need to add some features to it so that we can attach our arms. To do this, we're going to start by adding more to our sketch. We're still in our sketch environment. I'm going to click on a line to create a new line. You can also find this here or by pressing L. I'm going to draw a line out from the side here, and you'll see that when I get close to another sketch line, my crosshairs lock on and become blue. This is very useful if you want it to lock onto a line, and it allows you to make sure that your areas are enclosed if you're creating an area. You'll also see, as we said before, that different constraints can be automatically applied. In this case, I want to draw a line from the center of this line here, the center between these 2 points and on this red line. You'll see that when I hover over that, it locks on and it creates a blue triangle. Now this is mimicking the midpoint constraint, which you can see up at the top. And what that means is that it is fixed, it is constrained in the midpoint of this line here. So we want that, so I'm going to click to create our line. And I'm going to draw it out to the left here. Now in fact, I could draw dimensions separately like I did last time. In this case, I'm just going to draw it in, and we want it to be 15 millimeters long. You'll see that now I've written that in, a little lock icon has come up next to my part. And that means that because I've manually typed it in, I can change the angle if I want, but even if I adjust it with the mouse, it's locked in to 15 millimeters long. I can press Tab again and switch between them if I wanted to. If I wanted to lock the 180, I could type it back in and then press Tab again, and you see the lock appears. But it should lock on automatically to your red line. Now that we've made this, I want to press to click, and that will confirm that sketch line. But you'll see that actually another line has appeared. So in Fusion 360, when you're drawing a sketch line, if you want to continue with your sketch, you can click and it will create a point there. So our previous line is still there, and it will start a new sketch line from that point. In this case, I don't want any more sketch lines. I'm happy with the one I have, so I can move my mouse around and click on the little green tick, which will be somewhere in the area. That will finish my sketch without drawing a new line. Alternatively, before I had clicked on the previous one, if I'm drawing a line, say I wanted it there, if I've let go of my mouse and I have it where I am, which is much easier often when it's locked on, I can actually press enter and it'll automatically just end the sketch where it is with that line. So if I press enter, it will create that line. Now, I don't want this line, so I'm just going to press delete. But those are the two options. You either click and continue, or you can press enter to completely stop. We now have our 15 millimeter line, and you'll see we have a horizontal vertical constraint here and a midpoint constraint, you can see. Now we're using this endpoint as a reference for a circle to create our section that juts out for our fixing. But what that means is that this line here isn't actually serving any purpose. We don't want it to be physically there. So what we can do is we can click on the line and we can go over to our sketch palette on the right hand side. Now the sketch palette allows you to change different things about what you're viewing in your sketches. For example, I could turn off constraints and you'll see the constraints disappear. Same goes for dimensions, profiles, all sorts. But at the top here you have a line type option, and what this means is that you can select a line and make it a construction line. You'll see that it changes to be a dotted, slightly greyed out line, and this means that it is not a physical line that's going to be there. It's not going to affect much. All it is a reference line. And in this case, that's exactly what we want. If you want to change it back, you can always click on a line and unselect it, or you can turn it on to begin with, and then any line you create will be a construction line. Just watch out for this though, because I've created my line and I've ended that line, but it's still turned on. So sometimes you want to create a construction line, but it might still be turned on after you've created it when you don't want it. So just keep an eye out for that. I'm going to delete these. Now that I have my construction line, I'm going to use this endpoint as a reference. So we're going to create a circle. Another thing you can use a sketch palette for is you'll see that feature options appears whenever you're creating a new sketch. Here we can draw different types of circles. So you could choose, say, a 2-point circle, which allows you to define 2 points on the end of on the edge of a circle. But in this case, we actually want a center diameter circle because our reference point is the center of the circle. Now I have this. You can see I've got construction still turned on, so I want to turn that off. Now I want to click on this point, and you'll see that box pop up again, which means that it's locked to that point. Once I click, I can drag my circle out, and we want this circle to be 25 millimeters in diameter. So I can type in 25 and press enter to create my line. Again, you can see a new area has been created because it's separate, and we can click on these areas if you wanted to. Now that we have our circle, I want to create 2 lines going straight down to a part to join it. So I'm going to click on the line tool again. I'm going to click on my circle and on the edge. But you'll see A, these are blue, B, these are cutting through my circle, and they're not quite perpendicular. We want these to be completely perpendicular to our vertical line. So we're going to apply some other constraints here. First of all, we're going to apply the perpendicular constraint. And what this will do is it will make our lines perpendicular to the 2 we select. So I've selected these 2 lines and they're now perpendicular. You can see the little perpendicular icon come up. I'm going to do the same here. It'll turn to be perpendicular. But now our lines aren't on the edge of the circle when we want them to be. So what we want to do is apply a tangent. You can find the tangent constraint here, and it'll allow you to select your 2 lines, or your line and your circle, and it will move your line to be tangential to the circle. You can see the 2 constraints appear with the little icons. Now we have our lines where we want. Now we want this area in the middle here. I'm just going to press escape. You can see we want these areas here to extrude. What that means, we have actually 3 areas in this case, but we don't need these 2 side circles. Now I can select this line, but you'll see that it selects the entire circle. And I don't want to delete the entire circle. But what we can do is we can go to the modify area and select trim. It's also T on your keyboard. If you select trim, what this will do is it will cut away a line up to the point that it meets any other lines. So here I can hover over this section and you'll see that the red section is where it will cut, and that is where it meets the construction line here and our point up here. So it allows us to cut out these 2 center parts and create 1 area. Just beware that this line here is actually part of the dimension. A lot of people get confused because they think the line hasn't been deleted. This is just a reference for the dimension to show you where the dimension is going because it's a diameter. So just watch out for that. I could do the same here, but in this case it's a lot easier to select 7 sections. Because we need 7 sections. We need this to be replicated across our entire hexagon. Now, if you really wanted to, you could sit there for the next 10-15 minutes and draw each one individually, but that just seems like a bit of a waste of time. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to use what's called the pattern tool. Now the pattern tool allows you to take a part and replicate it in a pattern throughout your model. You'll find it within the create menu near the bottom, and in this case we want a circular pattern because we want our pattern to rotate around a central axis. But you can also do a rectangular pattern where it goes out into a rectangular shape. So select circular pattern. You'll see on the right that the circular pattern menu box pops up, and we can select our objects that we want to replicate, in this case it's our 2 sidelines and our semicircle. We select our center point, which is the center of our polygon, and you'll see that these 2 replications pop up. Now this is because Fusion 360 automatically defaults to having 3 replications. But you'll see here there's a dialog box for quantity. It's also on the side here at the bottom, and you can change this to be 6 so that we have each of our sides with one of these sections. Click OK, and you'll see that these 6 are replicated throughout. You won't see the constraints because these are still based on this, but they all are there. What we want to do now is we want to bring our part into the 3D. Now to do that, first of all, we need to get out of the sketch environment. So you can do that by pressing Finish Sketch on the right here, or the big green tick up at the top. You'll see we'll go back into the solid area, and we can rotate around and see, this sketch, whilst lovely, is only in 2D, and we want a 3D part. So to do that, we can press on the home or orbit around, and we want to use the extrude tool. Now the extrude tool takes an area and pulls it. In this case, we're going to pull it from 2 dimensions into the 3rd dimension. You can find the extrude tool in the create menu or by pressing E, and once you select it, you'll see the extrude box pop up on the right. We want to select our profiles, which in this case is the center, but also all 6 of our areas. Now that we've done this, you can see a blue arrow, and it allows you to drag your part up into the 3D. Now, we want our part to be 5mm thick, and you can see here that I dragged it a bit too far, 45mm. So I can change this, just type in 5, and it will become 5mm thick. Press enter to confirm, and we have our 3D part that you can orbit around.